again of two minds almost between like targeting where the company will be 2, 3 years from now, right? But at the same time being very tolerant for like, well, we're not there yet. And it'll be duct tape and it will be chaotic. A lot of it will be messy until we get there. So one of the
Yeah.
rules we often go by with our clients, what my colleague always says is, how can you do the 20% that gets you to 80% of the result right now? And this is
Yeah.
kind of the competitive agility of a startup because you'll always have way too few people. You'll always have way too many priorities. You'll always have things that change all the time on you. But to embrace that and to still work towards a vision 2, 3 years down the road is really crucial in my mind.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Grow IT podcast. Your host here, Alessandro Cutri, joined today by none other than Roland Siebelink. We'll be diving into his story, a little bit about some of his unicorn exits and what they're building over at MidStage Institute. It's definitely something special, especially if you're a startup. Make sure to stick around. We're going to share some actionable insights for you guys. So without further ado, I'll kind of just pass them over to you, Roland. If you don't mind just introducing yourself to the audience and telling them a little bit about yourself and how you went on to start MidStage Institute.
Of course. Thank you so much, Alessandro. Really appreciate the invitation. So hello, folks. My name is Roland Siebelink. Funny name from the Netherlands originally, but I've also lived in Belgium, Switzerland, and I'm now in Silicon Valley for the last 15 years. And one of the reasons why I moved around so much was that I had 3 chances of being part of a unicorn growth story in my life. Very lucky that way. Every time we grew a company from about 10 to 1,000 people, roughly in about 3 years' time. So I've definitely seen that like fast forward growth story multiple times. And I started seeing patterns like this is things that founders typically do wrong. This is the things that they did right in retrospect. And so these days with MidStage Institute, what we try to do is to help founders that are on that ambitious growth trajectory to really make the right decisions, to be able to see around the corner what's going to happen, know what's going to be in the next chapter, and guide them through that tricky mid-stage. Because I don't know if you know, Alessandro, but many founders assume that they will immediately be successful as soon as they've raised the first round. But in fact, the failure rate is still extremely high.
Definitely. And it's one of those very, what is it? 9 out of 10 startups fail within the first 5 years at some point, right? So it's definitely, it's not easy, right? And there's a lot of obstacles that come along the way, and I'm actually really excited to talk to you a little bit about them because we're obviously a startup over here as well, and we're always looking to learn in terms of different aspects of that, as I'm sure our audience is as well. So what are some of those common challenges that you see from these startups and some of the biggest mistakes that they make? And like, what's some advice that you could give in terms of, how to avoid some of those common pitfalls? I know that's kind of broad, but I'm curious to
Of
see
course,
what you
yeah.
say.
One very common pitfall is that they are unable to grow with the business because as the business changes, the requirements on you as a leader change a lot, right? And that is so different that very often you have to do like kind of learn to do the exact opposite of what made you successful in the beginning. That is now going to make you fail, right? And
Yeah.
so this is really, really hard for successful people like you and me to grip and to grok, to actually have to give up the very thing that made you successful. So
Yeah.
there's definitely one psychological aspect in how do I grow as a leader and as a founder in
Yeah.
these companies.
Yeah, and that's tough, right? Because like you're always evolving in terms of your role, especially as a CEO. Like in the beginning, right? You may be the business, right, by yourself. You are the business, and then as you start to bring on people, it's about becoming more of that leader where you're no longer just having to run it yourself, but now having to manage different people, different personalities, and there's a lot that goes into that, right? When it comes to that, beyond that, I'm curious to hear. What are like, obviously like one of the big things that you always hear from startups is like trying to find that product market fit, right? Being able to establish that. What are some things that you often, when you find a company and you're like, hey, like this has unicorn potential. What are those, couple things that you're looking for when you're like, hey, this is going to be a good one?
Okay, so if we knew that, then of course we would all be richer than Elon Musk, right? So
Well, of course, of
it
course,
is,
of
it
course.
is. If
Yeah,
there's one thing you learn in Silicon Valley, like sometimes it's the most ridiculous ideas that actually get the most traction, and nobody would have expected it. I will
yeah,
tell you, I
yeah,
was here when Airbnb was doing their first rounds, and people were just laughing about, did you hear these guys? They're trying to make a startup about people being able to just go sleep on an airbed in a random other person's apartment, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
all
yeah.
the investors in the beginning were like, this is crazy. This can never work. Also
Hmm.
took them a long time to actually raise funding, but now it's one of the most valued startups in the entire Silicon Valley, right? So
Yeah,
sometimes it's especially because it's so non-obvious that it actually has a huge potential. But
yeah.
having said that, you have to look particularly like at what is their track record. So do you see some growth already? Do you see users that are coming back again and again and again that start showing some passion? And then if
Yeah.
there's anything that I can maybe predict, it's much more about the grit of the founders and this very rare combination between, on the one hand, a certain stubbornness about their vision, but on the other hand, extremely pragmatic in how to realize that vision. And
Mm.
as you can imagine, Alessandro, that is not something that it comes together very often because people are typically either very stubborn or they're very like pliable, call it pragmatic, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Usually having a bit of both is extremely rare.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those things where it's hard, it's hard to balance yourself. It's almost why sometimes having partners that have that, one that has one, and the other one that has the other one, right? To be able to the yin and the yang. But
Exactly.
on that itself, right? I'm curious to get your perspective, Roland, because I feel like there's a lot of times in startups, right, where people have these crossroad moments, right? Where they're,
Mhm.
as a startup founder, you want to know, like, yes, you're going to continue to be stubborn and continue to, like, go through this wall. And I like to ask people this question because I always get some different opinions. Uh,
Mhm.
Given the fact that you work with so many different startups, what would you say is the, when an entrepreneur should know when to, like, continue to go through that, like, brute force the wall? When should they slightly pivot and, maybe, do something not like a 180, but when they should, like, maybe try to go around the wall instead, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think true pivots, to your point, should be only in the early stage. It's
Mhm.
going to be rare that that is going to be successful when you're already in a revenue stream and you already have like a product line out there.
Yeah.
Um, focusing on the mid stage where I specialize, I would say the distinction is much more between being stubborn about your vision, but being extremely open towards any way of reaching it, right?
Mm.
And very often that goes together with when you've hired a few folks, people you trust, people that have their own creativity, trying not
Right.
to prescribe exactly how they have to do things, but just tell them like, this is my commander's intent. This is a term we use a lot. It comes from the military, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I want you to conquer that hill no matter what. Now, I have some ideas on how you could conquer it. I'm happy to share them with you, but in the end, it's about you conquering that hill. So if you need
Definitely.
to throw all my ideas out the window, if you need to try 50 times in different ways, that's all fine. I want you to conquer that hill.
Yeah. 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 In whatever way that you do it, right? In whatever way possible, you conquer the hill.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
maybe the hill is only part of a much bigger map and a whole area that they need to conquer, right? I mean, we use these war analogies because it's often about conquering market share, of course, right?
Business feels like
Uh,
war sometimes, right? It definitely,
it does.
it
Well,
definitely feels
if a
like
startup
war.
doesn't feel like war, you're not doing it right. I'll tell you that, you know.
Yeah, 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 definitely. It'll definitely, I always say, building a company will put some hair on your chest, right? It'll make you it'll turn you into a different person. But
Yeah, for
it's
those
the,
watching the videos, I'm sure that we can both attest to that, right? So,
yeah, 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 yeah. But there's nothing quite like it. And you being a part of these, different startups that then turned into these, massive, massive companies from
yeah.
10 to 10,000s of, 1,000 employees. I'm
Hmm.
curious to hear a little bit about, what were some of those acquisition strategies, and, like, what are some practical things that people can implement that, obviously there's multiple ways you can market and multiple ways that you can, sell your product, but
Yeah.
what's kind of like your framework and your philosophy around,
Yeah, yeah.
acquisition?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. Well, of course, it's your expertise, but also I would say that sufficient investment in especially demand generation is
Hmm.
a gigantic, cause for why startups don't ultimately grow. And the reason is that this is a bit of context, maybe, Alessandro, but a
Hmm.
lot of the tech companies are started by people with more of an engineering background, product
Yeah,
background, right?
yeah,
Those are obviously often the most successful because they get that product so right.
yeah.
But then, because they have typically little education in marketing, let alone sales, they
Hmm.
often just assume that because the product is so great, it's the better mousetrap, right? And people should
Yeah,
just find it and automatically come. And it
yeah,
takes them typically years before they start realizing that in order to conquer a market, you really need to be very systematic, you need to be organized, and typically also start being aggressive, moving from inbound to outbound, for example, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
it'll take, I'll tell you, Alessandro, it takes people often years to move from, just building a sales force of salespeople in the field
hmm,
towards actually, orchestrated demand generation, pipeline activity, marketing drive. And the more and more I coach these companies, the more I actually take a proactive role in driving
yeah.
them to find an agency, find people who do that, and move sales budget to marketing budget.
Yeah, and it's you're such a you bring up such a great point, right? And obviously there is a component of like you want product led growth, right? You want referrals, you want word of mouth, of course, but is that going to be what's, especially if you're looking for funding, right? And you're funded, you're expected to grow, right? You're not just you're expected to have
It's a pact with
growth.
the devil that you sign, right? So as soon as you sign that, you are expected to grow and you better deliver or else.
Exactly, exactly. And so I almost feel like those skills that you mentioned when it comes to marketing and sales, it's one of those most important to really,
Hmm.
to continuing to grow the company. And there's so much, especially when it comes into the tech space, what I've noticed with, CEOs and maybe some of the founders that, build the product and they're so product oriented that they're like, I'll just hire someone from the sales and marketing side. Like I'll just let them figure it out. Or we'll bring in a CRO, we'll bring in someone and they'll figure it out. And oftentimes that's it's a very tricky game you play there, right? Because I feel like as a founder, as a startup, you want to
I'll be
be.
blunt, Alessandro. Sorry to interrupt you, but this will fail. 100%. If
Yeah,
you, as a CEO founder, are unable to be the chief salesperson of the company, you will fail. It's as simple
yeah,
as that.
yeah. And I'm curiously, right, if you like in obviously you've probably seen it firsthand, right? Working with all these startups, you have to learn these skills, right? You have to be able
Yeah.
to implement and that itself. So okay, there's a lot of different things that you just mentioned there that I think is really neat. I'm curious to dive into like you personally, like, right, because you are a part of a lot of these different
Yeah.
startups. What are some like lessons that you've learned that like you'd be, like war stories that you've gone through that you kind of, came out the other side? Like what's that type of mindset that you need, to be that successful startup founder? Like what do you have to tell yourself?
I think you have to be again of two minds almost between like targeting where the company will be 2 3 years from now, right? But at the same time being very tolerant for like, well, we're not there yet, and it'll be duct tape and it will be chaotic and a lot of it will be messy until we get there. So one of the
Yeah,
rules we often go by with our clients, what my colleague Doug always says is, how can you do the 20% that gets you to 80% of the result right now,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
kind of the competitive agility of a startup because you'll always have way too few people. You'll always have way too many priorities. You'll always have, things that change all the time on you. But to embrace that and to still work towards a vision 2 3 years down the road is really crucial in my mind.
yeah. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And so when you guys with mid stage and what you guys are looking to build, right?
Hmm.
Obviously you've been in the market for a little bit now, almost
Yeah.
coming up on 10 years. Like
Hmm.
what is the vision that you guys are looking to do like within the next, 12 months? Like what's that going to continue to look like for you guys?
Yeah, what we're really working on right now is to focus even more on AI-enabled companies, right? So, all the experience that we've had over the years in how we coach people, a lot of it is what we found around, we do not provide the answers, but what we have and what the founders are missing are the right questions, right?
Mm,
So, if we ask them, for example, like, what is your core target group? I mean, right in your ballpark, defining your ICP, right? Something that
hmm
a lot of startups are really bad at, right?
hmm
Uh, you know, and so then they will say, well, ICP, it's like business to business. Okay, yes, and then of course, with your experience, you'll ask a lot more deeper questions, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
These
yeah.
days, we start actually providing tools where people have the AI prompts built in so that they can just quickly copy paste into ChatGPT and it'll ask the right questions right there and they can play themselves with providing the right answers.
Yeah.
Often we'll even write these prompts in terms of like, give us five takes on this strategy. It'll be built from an Excel
hmm
file or Google Sheets that basically puts in variables from other fields, of course, right? So very
Yeah.
simple and pragmatic, even clunky, if you will, but it helps so much in getting people a much better insight in how to run their business, taking the right decisions, and then also be able to see what they should delegate to employees, or these days more and more what they should delegate to AI.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. And I'll give away, something that we found really useful in that on that topic as well. When it comes to establishing your ICP, and this is why we always recommend people, record a lot of their sales calls or
Mhm.
they record the things that they do, because what you can do is you can take all of your sales calls that you've had with prospects or anything, or whatever, wherever you've talked to a customer, and you can get the transcripts, right, and you can feed it into AI, right, into ChatGPT, and be able to ask it different questions around your ICP, what it should be based upon the conversations that you are having, right. And so what this will allow you to do is figure out, okay, where should I be positioned? Like, what are the most common pain points that I'm talking about? Like, and then from there, you get a whole bunch of different content ideas that you can talk about based upon your conversations that are actually relevant, to your ICP and
Yeah,
what.
exactly. And this is exactly the reason why we've started to focus more and more on AI enabled and AI embracing companies, because you can imagine with some companies, you have that conversation like, what, record all my sales calls? Are you crazy? Right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But other companies have embraced that almost natively, right? It's in their
yeah,
DNA. And so the
yes,
way we coach companies is so vastly different. I mean, I used to joke like it's already vastly different whether they're on the Google stack or the Microsoft stack. And we've even considered putting surcharges for people
uh,
on the Microsoft stack in the past. But now it's actually like a whole different category, right? And
yeah,
if you can coach people that have AI in the background everywhere they go, it's so much more effective. And, now people raise Series A when they only have 10, 12 people. It used to be 27, 30 people,
yeah.
but it's basically like every person on board has basically a team of AI assistants, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's like you have to be taking advantage of the technology too, right? Because it makes your life so much easier and you're able to operate so much more efficiently. And I tell people in my workforce and our employees, I'm like, use AI as much as you can, like, right? You want to be using it to be able to help you out with, getting you either, 70, 60% of the way there, but then
Yeah.
being able to, obviously optimize from there. But totally agree with that. Totally agree. And it's where we're
Well, and
moving.
it's also I think what I came to with some customers and also like people that are now quite big. Interestingly, the ones that have grown into full unicorns, they're actually less eager to embrace AI because now, of course, they have a lot more internally confidential documents that they are
Mm,
afraid will leak, right?
mm,
And so the bigger the company, this has been a tale of all times, of course, the bigger the company, the more risk they have.
yeah.
And so the less agile they will be in taking advantage of those new tools. But if you're a new startup, you have just 5 or 10 people, you have hardly any pipeline to defend, then what risk is there?
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. Roland, it's been fun talking to you, man, hearing a little bit about what you guys are doing. It definitely sounds like, something interesting. And it's always cool to talk to someone that, they're in the trenches, right? And you're working with different folks and you're continuously probably learning from more and more and more as you.
Oh yeah, the learning is the best part of this job. Like
Yeah. Yeah,
I've
yeah, yeah.
I've been saying for the last 10 years, I never need another job in my life. It's just so rewarding to help all these founders, help them through their worries, through that tricky mid stage, and help them be super successful.
Yeah. If you had to go back, right, and knowing everything that you know now, right, and you've learned and you've scaled these different companies, what advice would you give to your younger self? What would you tell your younger self?
Always the difficult question, of course, but I would say, especially to my very much younger self, I would say it's a lot less about knowledge and it's a lot more about relationships and keeping in touch with people,
Yeah,
and ultimately, it's your social capital, your whole relationship base that actually makes you super successful in the world. And that even in the world of AI, that's probably going to be multiple times so, right?
totally agree. And I think it's relationships are the name of the game, right? When it comes to building a business, building anything special, and having that ability to, you know, actually speak with folks, right? And I think that
Mhm.
as AI is, continuing to take over and, automation is going to be more and more present, I think the human touch and human interaction is going to be so much more valuable as we continue to move more towards that movement. But I love it. I love it, Roland. It's been a pleasure, man, getting the chance to hear more about your story and hearing what you guys are doing. People are listening to this, they're a startup and they're like, hey man, Roland, how can we come and work with you? What can we do? What are some good ways to go ahead and find you?
Yeah, definitely find me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of our insights and our new learnings on LinkedIn all the time. So I'm sure you can put the link in the show notes, Alessandro. And
Yes.
so do connect with me there. I connect almost with everyone who asks. And then, of course, there's our website, midstage.org, where you can download a lot of like easy tools, like how do I organize my team? How do I set up my strategy? Things like that.
Perfect. Well, I'll include all those in the description for people to go and check out, and make sure to check you out. If you guys did watch all the way to the end, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and go check out Roland and the team, what they're doing at MidStage. But if you guys did make it, we appreciate it. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Roland. It's been an absolute pleasure, my friend.
It's been a great pleasure being on here. Great podcast. Thank you, Alessandro.
Thank you, my friend.